Hello and welcome back to All Things Money. I'm your host, David Blain. Today's show, we're going to devote to talking about inflation, how it's measured and what it means to you as the investor, consumer. If you missed the first segment, it was a good introduction to the topic of inflation, some things, some tools that we use to help combat inflation in a portfolio, and a little bit of introduction of what it is. So CPI, Consumer Price Index, is the Bureau of Labor Statistics of the federal government. It's their indication of how high inflation is. And the Fed, the Federal Reserve, is another governmental body. Well, I don't want to get into the Fed today. We'll just say the Fed is tasked with maintaining, one of its mandates is to maintain inflation at an appropriate level, and number two is full employment. We're going to be talking about that number one mandate of keeping inflation at a manageable level, somewhere people think in the 1.5%, 1 3/4 range to around 2% is probably the maximum inflation that that they would be targeting. And so, what does all that mean to you, at the household level? So, in order to break that down, we look at the CPI, what's called the CPI-U. Most people cut off the U and just call it the CPI, but it's the Consumer Price Index for the urban consumer, also known as the headline inflation. When you hear headline inflation, that's the CPI number. So it's broken down into several different components. Food and beverages is 15.3%. Housing is 41%. Apparel is 3.6%. Transportation is 16.9%. Medical care is 7.1%. Recreation is 6%. Education and communication is 6.8%. And other goods and services are 3.4%. And that's not listed, obviously, in the order of magnitude, but kind of we start off with food, housing, shelter, kind of their relative importance in the world. The other goods and services is kind of a grab bag of category. It has other things like tobacco, cosmetics, financial services, funeral expenses. If you head on over to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, you can get all the detailed information on this, but we just want to kind of stick at these broad categories. One thing that you may know or may notice that I didn't mention is energy. Energy is not a distinct component of the CPI. It's part of the subcomponents of the housing and transportation industry. So whenever you hear people talk about energy inflation, it's actually they're breaking out the transportation component and the housing component of energy and forming an energy index. But in itself, it is not its own component of the CPI. So there's eight major components. Some of them are fairly volatile. Some of them are relatively stable and increasing. Some are very stable. Some of them are stable, increasing. Others are volatile, and so in order to deal with some of these things, you will see sometimes what they call the core inflation, which is where they take out the food and energy components of it. The BLS, they do track energy as a separate aggregate index, but in the regular CPI, it's not a separate category. When we look at the energy index, is about 9.68% of the expenditures if you look at housing and transportation, and half goes to transportation fuels, mostly gasoline. And when you look at that against the other components, it's extremely volatile. It's kind of hard here. Obviously on the radio you can't see it, or TV, we don't have a graphic up. But if you look at an overlay of all these different components, historically about the rate of change of the different components, and then you overlay energy on top of it, you see how energy is extremely volatile, and why a lot of times you will see people talk about the core CPI where they strip energy out of it. It really alters the perspective of the data. One other thing that I thought I would talk about, there is a subcategory of education and communication, and within that, college tuition and fees is kind of a subcategory, and it is by far and away the past decade the largest increase compared to these other categories. It's just tremendous, the rate of change of the college tuition. Okay, just in case you wonder, it's about 1.7% of the total expenditure. This kind of gets into what does the CPI mean to you? Well, if you're a commuter, that energy CPI index means a lot to you. If you're retired and live in a walking over 50 retirement community and you don't eat a lot of food, well, energy and food don't mean a lot to you. It's the medical care, maybe. And so, once again, I encourage people to look at the CPI numbers, but for an even better view is to dig down into these subcategories to get a feel for your own family. For example, college. If you don't have kids in college or aren't contemplating going to college, it really doesn't affect you. But my goodness, if you have children like I do that are coming into the college age, it's been a tremendous, tremendous upswing in the college prices the past several years. And so that's why they have these subcategories. If you have time, go look at them. It's very instructive to see the way these different categories are moving as compared to just the numbers that you may see on TV. Well, we're coming up to our second break. When we come back in the final segment, we'll continue talking about inflation and its effect on you as an investor and consumer. So for All Things Money, I'm David Blain, your host.